Back to Fox top story. America's top diplomat says he hopes the U.S. and North Korea can get peace talks back on track after President Trump called off his meeting with Kim Jong Un. The president says he canceled because of open hostility from a North Korean official who warned of a possible nuclear-to-nuclear showdown. Let's bring in Ambassador James Jeffrey, former Deputy National Security Advisor to President George W. Bush. He helped supervise the last negotiations with North Korea. He is now with the Washington Institute. Ambassador, great of you to join us, sir. And I know you're the expert here, but this whole thing feels more to me like a negotiation more than a cancellation. Your take?
Exactly. First of all, the strong rhetoric out of North Korea was not from Kim Jong Un, the leader, but rather from one of his subordinates, and it was aimed not at the president, but at the vice president and previously John Bolton. That's one sign. But there's no doubt that the more serious sign, as Secretary Pompeo pointed out, was the lack of response from the North Koreans about setting up the summit. I've done 12 for, helped do 12 for 4 presidents. You don't go into this without knowing the details to some degree in advance. So the North Koreans were sending a signal they weren't ready.
Yeah, and there seemed to be a change in tone, Ambassador, of the second time that Kim Jong Un met with President Xi in China. What's your take on that? Was there some maybe, hey, you could get a little more out of this if you put a little more pressure on President Trump?
That's possibly the case. There certainly was something in his visit to Beijing. But we shouldn't assume that China wants this whole crisis with North Korea to end. It ties down most of our forces in the Far East rather than focusing on China in the South China Sea. And it makes China an extremely important interlocutor because without China, economic sanctions on North Korea are not going to be very effective. So China may be a little bit concerned about a warming of relations between the U.S., South Korea, and North Korea, and may have put the brakes on themselves via the North Koreans.
Been a lot of coverage today, Ambassador, about North Korea kind of taking journalists up to that facility, that nuclear facility, and blowing the thing up. But there really seems to be a very big difference, or a big difference in the definition of denuclearization between North Korea and the United States.
Exactly. The North Koreans, you'll remember in the meeting with South Korean President Moon a month ago, signed up to a document that says complete denuclearization of the peninsula. But they take, the North Koreans, a definition that would include U.S. forces that are backed by nuclear forces and various other arguments. But the point is, the U.S. has to insist on denuclearization. But as the president said in talking about this can be a step-by-step process. In fact, there's no other way to do it. But the U.S. has to keep its sights on the eventual target, which is denuclearization, and the North Koreans have to be held at least to a theoretical commitment to do so, or this isn't going to go very far.
And lastly, Ambassador, what's your advice right now? Is this thing maybe a time for cooling off, a couple of weeks of cooling off, or we keep talking to the North Koreans and the South Koreans and the Japanese and the Chinese to make this whole thing come together at some point in time?
We keep talking with all of them behind the scenes, beginning with our allies, which is South Korea and Japan. There's some indication they may not have known about the change in signals. But more importantly, there's a real chance to make progress. Kim Jong Un obviously wants this, otherwise he wouldn't have released the prisoners. So the president is right to have pulled out now, but in his letter to Kim Jong Un, he kept the door open. That's a very smart way to go forward at this point, and I think we should be comfortable seeing what happens next.
Yeah, and I think if the phone rang from North Korea, the president might pick it up. Ambassador James Jeffrey,
yes.
Good to see you, sir. Thank you.